Thanks, y'all, for joining us. And for anyone who showed up thinking they were going to get an Evan Smith interview, I apologize that you're getting this guy instead. But and thanks to Mr. Brown and Mr. Sitton for being with us today. And I guess I'll just get right into it. Why do you two both want to regulate railroads in the state of Texas? Okay, well, probably everybody here, for the most part, knows what the Railroad Commission does. But for the millions of people watching our live stream, I'm guessing there's one or two who might be a little bit confused about the title. So I guess, Steve, first, can you tell us why Railroad Commission, why should they be interested in a race that's, I guess, 9 spots down on the ballot? Is it an important position? What do you think?
Absolutely, and I assume that if they're watching this, and they probably know that this has anything to do with trains, but everything to do with our oil and gas future in this state. And we know that oil and gas in this state has been such an economic driver for our economy and for the national economy as well. And we set trends here that the rest of the world watches and pays attention to. And so in that, this agency has long been seen as one of the more powerful agencies, despite the fact that it's a little lower on the ballot, and despite the fact that the name does not reflect what it actually does. It still maintains a level of power and influence in the state. But why it's so important, particularly now, because of the growth in activity and production in our state with oil and gas, we have to make sure that we're doing things the right way on a sustainable basis, on a long-term basis, in a basis that's sensitive to environments, that's sensitive to local communities, and that still continues to facilitate the type of growth that our state needs and deserves.
Okay. And Ryan, I assume you'd agree, important position. Now, in your words, why should voters look down the ballot and care about this race?
Sure. Well, since the 1970s, we've talked about energy independence in this country, and it is becoming a reality to us now that due to the massive expansion in oil and gas development, not just in the state of Texas, but around the United States, we are seeing this renewed position of the United States as a real global energy player. And if we achieve that and move beyond that to a point of being a dominant force in global energy, it will have massive impacts, not just to our energy industry, but to the global economics, to national security. And so why should people be interested? We do. We want people to be confident in how that energy is developed and how our natural resources are utilized. And so as we go into the next generation, if you will, of energy regulation, that's done in a language of science and technology and data, and that people continue to have confidence in how we're doing that job.
Okay, good deal. And one thing, as I'm covering the Railroad Commission, I hear from the commissioners and other folks who are involved is that the commission, as we're having this explosion of production, I guess some people don't like to use the word explosion when we're talking about this, but
much like using saying shark week.
Yeah, there you go. Is that the Railroad Commission, it hasn't always grown with its responsibility in terms of its resources. I'm wondering, Ryan, if you're a commissioner, would you advocate or do you think the agency needs more resources to do more as it's issuing more permits? I think permits are supposed to double in the next couple of years here.
Yes, great question, and it is something that probably any state agency struggles with, particularly when the needs for that agency ebb and flow fairly strongly. So when you see a big boom in energy development and oil prices are up, you see the demand for permits go up a lot. When you see the inevitable other end of that cycle, that demand goes down. So the challenge to the agency is how do you flex with that? And certainly we're in a boom cycle right now, so making sure that we not only have the resources to process permits, but to also answer questions to the public, questions to operators, questions to anybody who want to understand what's going on in the development around them. Those resources, not just getting the people in, but making sure they're trained and they're competent, and we have the systems needed to be efficient in how we run that.
So you're prepared to work with the legislature if you decide, hey, we need X million more dollars to get inspectors, to get new upgraded permit processing system, you're prepared to ask for that money?
Whatever we need to do to get the job done in the state of Texas to make sure our citizens are confident in energy regulation, that's what I'll request to do.
What do you think, Steve? Railroad commissions have enough resources, and where would you add them if needed?
No, it's clearly underfunded. It's an agency that has not kept pace with the growing demand of it. We are, in fact, a 20th century agency regulating a 21st century industry at this point. And we've known that now for the last couple of cycles. Even through surpluses, we know that we have not done our duty as a state to fund the agency that is built to regulate and support the industry that is producing the surplus that we have, right? And so, you know, being the only person on this stage who has any appropriations experience, I started my career in public policy back in 1998, 99 under Sylvester Turner, and I worked on his appropriations matters. And so it's not only a question of whether or not we need it, but do we have someone on the commission with the skill set to be able to work the process in a way that, from the LAR to the appropriations request to the conference committee report, that someone can work that process to make sure those funds are there. And it's important that we have not only enough people and qualified people, I would admit, but we also have an agency that can retain its staff. You know, one of the things that we see happen in public agencies, in this one in particular, is that once you get about a year or so of experience, then the private sector snatches you up. And that's perfectly fine, but if we want to retain staff so that we have a continuity of experiences on the field, on the ground, we got to make sure that they're paid a salary that is market value.
And I think it's interesting, just what I picked up on you mentioning your appropriations experience. You've worked on a lot of campaigns here, and what seems to be a big difference between you two is, Ryan, you have the energy industry experience. Steve, you're kind of more been on the political side. I guess Steve first. What would you say to the criticism that you haven't been in the energy industry before, and maybe you haven't developed that expertise? Is that a valid criticism?
It could be. Depends on the structure of the agency that we're talking about. I think with this agency, because it's a three-person commission, I think that commission operates more like a board as opposed to technocrats. And so we want to make sure that as a board, we have the experiences, perspectives, and diversity and approaches to making sure that we're making the right decisions and making the right rules in a way that's open, that's transparent, that's engaging of all stakeholders involved, not just with the industry itself. And so I think the value add that you get with having someone with public administration knowledge, with someone who has public policy experience, someone who has built relationships in communities and knows how to engage constituents in the communities, is a value add that's needed right now on this three-person commission. I think more so than ever before, particularly as it relates to some of the dissatisfaction, some of the lack of trust and faith that the public has with this agency.
Okay, Ryan, and how about you? You've touted your energy industry experience, your experience as an engineer. What is it that you would be the first engineer? Is it 50 years?
Yep, that's correct.
To be on the commission. All right. So what do you say to that? That idea that maybe you don't have the public policy experience. I mean, where's the line there?
Well, as you look at the questions that people are asking around the state today, whether it's around seismic activity, water usage, construction of infrastructure, new pipelines, local restrictions on drilling activities, none of these should be political questions. They're technical questions. How do we know that the activities are being developed well, that they are scientifically sound, that the safety factors that are built into the rules that we utilize are industry leading, best practice? And so right now, particularly as you said, since I'll be the first engineer in 50 years to serve as a commissioner, that experience and that credibility is going to be really valuable, and I think provide a value to the citizen out there who wants to feel confident in what we're doing, that people who are leading the commission have the technical expertise to do so.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, a lot of times, there's a big staff at the commission. Maybe you'd like to be bigger, but there are engineers at the commission. So, but you think, is it about speaking the right language with those engineers, or what do you need to add to the staff that you already have?
So I think certainly, having that conversation with the staff, whether it's the geologists, the engineers, the inspectors, having a real working dialogue about what we're doing and how to advance the commission into the next century. But probably most importantly, engaging with the public. After all, the public is hiring us to do a job. Right? When they vote for us to put us in office, they're hiring us to do a job, and we need them to feel confident that we are qualified to do that job. That yes, I have the expertise to serve you and make you confident, give you the confidence in what the Railroad Commission is doing.
And so when I'm covering the Railroad Commission, I'm fascinated by what seems to be kind of a two-pronged mission. On the one hand, it's pretty clearly a cheerleader for the industry. It wants to expand oil and gas production in the state. But on the other hand, it regulates these industries. And I'm always curious about kind of where that line is drawn. With your experience in the energy sector. I mean, does that leave you vulnerable to being more on the industry side of the line than the advocacy side of the line?
Well, I would recharacterize that because I think that's a common misconception that there is these two forces pulling on the job that we have to do as a commissioner, and it's not the case. In 20 years of serving in the energy industry as an engineer, dealing with regulation, dealing with best practice, now as a candidate engaging literally hundreds of energy companies to talk about important issues out there, I've never once had an energy company tell me that in the state of Texas that we shouldn't have regulation or that our regulations should be scaled back. What everybody wants is confidence of the citizens of the state of Texas, which means the operators want to know that one bad actor doesn't give the entire industry a bad name. So let's have good, consistent regulations that everybody has to follow that make sense so that we as operators can continue to produce and we as citizens can be confident in that production.
What do you think, Steve? Do you think there is a line? Where is that line, and kind of where would you fall on the side of the advocacy versus advocacy for the public versus energy industry? Right.
Well, you know, I've kind of touted myself as a public advocate for the agency and the need for having a public advocate to serve on the actual commission itself. And I think in that kind of brings a stark distinction between my opponent and I. But we obviously need to make sure that we're striking a better balance at the agency. I think that in my conversations with hundreds of landowners, property owners, farmers, residents, and communities that are being impacted by drilling, they're telling me a different story. They're telling me that they have lost faith and confidence in the process, and that the process is built to serve them and to protect them and to meet their needs and to listen to them more than anything else, to listen to them. That is the value add that we need to be able to bring to this commission. Someone who's going to bring that perspective of not only listening to what those concerns are, those issues are, but someone who can structurally change the agency's culture in a way that it becomes more transparent, not so much in terms of outcomes, but in terms of the process, whereby someone who has a legitimate claim or problem, but may not have the resources to adequately fight that claim or to advocate for it themselves, that the process can still work for them the same way it works for someone who doles out $100,000 for an attorney to be able to help them, assist them through the hearing examining process. And so the balance can be achieved, and it can be achieved in a way that works for everybody. Look, we're Texans. We can figure out how to do these things and have these things work together, how we can continue the job creation and the economic development that's taking place with the oil and gas industry, but also serve the interests of everyday citizens and protect our environment at the same time.
And when you talk about balance, I'm curious because you have called the agency broken at times, and you said there needs to be some sort of...
I'm not the only one.
Well, right, okay. And I'm curious, though, what you particularly would bring to the agency. Are you saying that you want to be kind of more on the side of this kind of consumer advocate to try to somehow tilt the balance, so to speak? Or would you still try to kind of toe the line? I mean, how would you speak, for instance, to some of these energy companies? And how would you relate to them?
Well, I think the same need that I'm hearing out in the community with regards to making sure that there's a voice, someone's listening, also exists in the industry as well. I spent some time at a couple of polling places this past week and ran into some folks who work in the industry. And, they've since emailed me a litany of issues that they would want me to work with them on to make sure that the process is streamlined at the agency. They find the agency to be too unwielding and too massive to be more efficient for their needs and be more responsive to their needs as well. And so I think this extends not only to how we serve and better serve the public, but it also extends to how we better serve operators out in the field as well, the folks who are living this thing day to day and trying to do their job and work through this agency to get their job done, but find that talking between one district and the next, that the information could be different and the responses can be different, making sure that the computer system is more user-friendly. And we know that there's been changes to that system, but it still needs to be more user-friendly for folks. And the agency itself needs to be more accessible, is what I'm hearing from a lot of folks, a lot of operators out in the field.
Okay. And Ryan, I think earlier on in this campaign, in the race between y'all after the primary, Steve and his Libertarian opponent, Mark Miller, were talking a little bit about kind of bringing up these Sunset Commission proposals that came up in the last session. The Railroad Commission kind of narrowly avoided a reorganization during the sunset process. And the Sunset Commission proposals would change the name for one to maybe avoid some confusion about what it does, and limit contributions from companies before the commission, expand the recusal policy, and say that you have to resign before running. I'm wondering, are there any of those proposals that you would or would not agree with when you're looking at the Sunset Commission? Were any of those a good idea?
Well, certainly I'm a big proponent of changing the name. As I said, we've got to do a good job of being very public, be very engaging with the citizens, because we want to give them confidence. And to give them that confidence, they need to know that we know that we are working on this, and they know that we're working on this. So today, just the name itself is a start of a lot of confusion that we need to clear up. Others of those proposals, without getting into specifics, several of them either I agreed with the proposal, or at least agreed with the spirit of what they were trying to do. At the same time, we have to make sure that we're not hamstringing our railroad commissioners to not allow them to go out there and do the job of engaging the public in the way that we need to, and engaging operators and engaging individual citizens and communities. And so not all of those, I think, were right on the money, but a lot of them were moving in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking about the resign to run proposal 2, because there's been so much turnover at the Railroad Commission. It's a 6-year term that you're running for. That's a long time. You two are both young guys, both 39 or so. You might have big political careers ahead of you. I mean, do you plan to stay the full 6 years, and why?
I do plan to stay a full 6 years. So to go back into my background, I've been in the energy industry my entire career, been very blessed. We have a very successful business. And so this is an opportunity for me to put my time and energy into something that I think, frankly, will make a big difference. Frankly, it'll change the world. If we can do these things right and develop energy correctly and give people in this state and around this nation a lot of confidence in how our energy industry is run. And so this very likely would be the only office I see myself serving in from where I sit today, and given my background and the things that I enjoy and feel really confident about in terms of my knowledge. Mm-hmm.
And Ryan, and you ran for a state house seat a couple years ago in 2012. Mm-hmm. And so what was the shift that you said, I didn't get that state house seat, and now it's the Railroad Commission?
Well, it was always about bringing expertise that's not in an office today, or not in the elected offices today that I have. So once again, having been an energy employee, an engineer by background, been blessed to run a successful business that now employs over 400 people. I mean, that's a lot of experience that is not very common in elected office. And so bringing those skills and that knowledge to the table, I think, would be really valuable. And as I said, you look for opportunities to put your time and energy into something that's really going to impact the world, and I think this is a good way to do it.
What about you, see full 6 years? Is that the plan?
We're actually talking about the recommendations that we publicly endorsed back in July. So we have already made that proclamation. I think it's important that we take these steps to make sure that the public has some confidence and trust that this isn't a fox garden, the hen house type of dynamic. And I think that too many folks throughout this state believe that is the case, and that is a reality for far too many people in this state. And I think these steps, the steps that were recommended by the Sunset Committee, and both I and I think Mark to a lesser degree, or to some degree, also endorsed, is a good first step. I mean, obviously, you don't want to have a regulator be in a position where they're accepting contributions from a company that has pending business before the agency. I mean, just the optics of that alone is discouraging to so many people in the state who are putting their full faith and confidence in an agency to serve them as well. And so we want to make sure that we break down those barriers, so at the very least, the perception of unyieldy influence isn't being seen through the public, and that the public has a sense that we can be objective, impartial agents for them in this process.
And then the 6 years question?
Yes, 6 years.
That's a plan?
6 years.
And do you have any ambitions after that, or?
Perhaps.
Yeah, perhaps. Okay.
Perhaps. We'll see what happens, but there may not be a seat for me to run for in 4 years. So.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha, and I guess we'll leave it at that.
Okay.
I want to get into some specific issues that the Railroad Commission has been dealing with right now. One nice news peg is that the Commission just passed its rules regarding oil-field wastewater disposal wells, which are suspected by some to be linked to some of the earthquakes that have been going on in North Texas and South Texas to a degree that folks are experiencing earthquakes that have never felt them before. I'm wondering, Ryan, do Do you like what they've done on earthquakes and disposal wells?
You know, we don't sit on the commission today, so we have to make sure, I think, that we qualify whatever I'm going to say with the fact that I don't have all of the information, all the data that the commissioners are seeing. But obviously, the three commissioners who are there feel like there is enough information out there that they need to gather, that they need to be putting forth proposals, putting out rules that will allow them to gather additional data when new disposal wells are requested and the permits for those are requested. So it seems like, given what I assume that they are looking at, that yes, they're making moves to allow them to gather more data, allow them to understand more what's happening in different regions around the state, around seismicity. So it seems like these are good moves. They've hired a seismologist who, from what I understand from the outside, is providing new and valuable input into their process. So all these do seem like good moves so far.
What do you think, Steve? Has good moves? Has it become timely enough? It's about a year since the earthquakes really started coming.
Yeah, in fact, I think the first earthquake hit the same week I filed for this position, and so I didn't know just how much earthquakes would be a part of the narrative of this campaign when I signed up for it. But you know, it's obviously a step in the right direction. When I went out to Azle back in January, I requested that the agency do more then. And so it's taken a little bit of time to get to this point, but I think this illustrates a prime example of how if we had a more engaging agency, whereby there was a process through which stakeholders at the beginning of the permitting process can have a say in terms of some of the concerns that they may have initially in a public manner, and then recommend ways to mitigate those risks. And then we could better protect those citizens and better keep them engaged into the process. And it's something that, you know, we've obviously spent a lot of time trying to work through and figure out, talking to folks who live in these impacted communities, what exactly can we do to change the process through which you can be more empowered in this as well.
And so right now there is a process, a contested case hearing, where when a company applies for a permit, certain parties are noticed if they're sort of within a certain radius and affected, and you can kind of have what's akin to a trial. Yeah. Why isn't that enough?
Because I don't think enough of the core stakeholders are notified. I think that in some cases, you know, you're talking about what's happening in Denton, and we'll probably talk about Denton a little bit more in this interview. But cases like that where school districts need to be notified, hospitals, administrators need to be notified. Of course, the folks who live in communities that are adjacent to this type of industrial activity. What we have not done well in this state, and I know we want to brag a lot about the things that we're doing with energy production, but what we have not done is had a robust, comprehensive conversation about what urban drilling is supposed to look like for us, and how that looks in each of the localities that are experiencing this now, and what that process is. Who are those stakeholders that need to be notified? What is that radius that needs to be used and applied in order to notify people about activity that's going to go around them? Going around them, and then what is that process to make sure that they know if they engage in that process, they can have an impact or influence the outcomes of decisions that are made relative to the permits.
What do you think, Ryan? Is the process that's set up right now in terms of weighing in on some of these permits, whether it's to drill a production well or to drill a disposal well, is that robust enough? Is there anything that you could see that could be beefed up?
Well, there's always opportunities to improve. And I think we have seen that in some of the other areas that we've been talking about, whether it's seismicity, it's pipeline construction, it's the Denton local restriction questions. But I have found that all those, and as I've spent time with folks in Denton, and not politically active folks necessarily, other groups, real estate agencies and those sort of things, real estate groups, you find that it's a general lack of knowledge. So there's not enough education out there. And I think that's the big opportunity for us to improve, is to help people understand these are what these developments mean, and how these developments may have an effect on what concerns you may have. We see that a lot of times people will have concerns, and because of a lack of information or lack of knowledge, they're connecting those concerns to things that are sometimes unrelated. And it's our job then to say, well, let's have a conversation about the things that you are concerned about, so that we're not artificially or inappropriately attributing those to aspects of the drilling or construction process that are unrelated. And that's, I think, the biggest opportunity for us today, is to do a better job of that education.
Okay. And since you both did mention Denton, I'm guessing a lot of folks in the room know that the city of Denton is approaching this pretty major vote on whether to ban hydraulic fracturing within city limits, which seems unheard of in Texas. This is Texas for goodness sakes. But a lot of money's been poured in by industry folks, and to a lesser extent on the other side, supporting the ban. there's some help from a national nonprofit environmental organization. But I am wondering, you're mentioning there's been a discussion about whether it's fracking itself that's causing some of these problems with some of these wells that are, maybe 300 feet from a home, that type of a thing, and are we attributing the right process to the problem? But I am wondering, just in the whole context of this urban drilling expansion, I mean, should a locality, have say like this? Should a locality be able to say, hey, maybe we don't want aspects of drilling within our city limits?
So that's what you're asking me?
Yeah, sorry.
I think that it's everybody's right to have a say, to express an opinion, a concern. At the end of the day, you have surface owner rights, you have mineral owner rights, you have producer and operator rights. I mean, everyone has a right to leverage their property, their minerals. And so one of the challenges, or one of the needs for the Railroad Commission is to make sure that the rules that are in place protect the rights of everybody who's engaged in that process. And in particular, the Railroad Commission as an agency has the expertise. We have the engineers, we have the geologists, the scientists, the background, the rules, to evaluate those things and help make those decisions and advise and educate people. So I think when you look at, I think the question might be, should individual municipalities, local areas have unilateral ability to make those rules? I think that'd be inappropriate, because I don't know that they have the expertise to make those calls. And I think what we see playing out in areas like Denton is concerns over things like dust and light and noise that may or may not have anything to do with hydraulic fracturing. But that's what has appeared on the ballot. So there's an educational process that we can do, that the Railroad Commission should do as, once again, employees directly of the voter. How can we help make sure that they're educated on what those concerns are, then bring those concerns back to the Commission so that we can have a real educated dialogue and make sure that we're giving them the confidence that we want them to have.
What do you say to that, Steve? Because I know that you've kind of backed Denton's ability to say no to fracking, for instance. You kind of supported that idea because of their issues. But what do you say to the notion that maybe it's not fracking that's causing this issue, and do localities have the expertise to make these decisions?
Well, I mean, for one, I think that we're in the position we're in with Denton because of a lack of communication early in the process. I think when people get to the point where they feel like they have no other alternative but to put a measure on the ballot and have an outright referendum on that measure, I think we failed those people early on in the process. And I think that is, again, a symptom of what's ailing this agency and its ability to communicate. It's not just communicate to people and tell them, we know what you don't, and we need to tell you what you need to know. I think, when families are reading reports about fracking byproducts on playgrounds, for instance, or on swings and things, I think that's a concern for those families. That's a legitimate concern, and we should not belittle those concerns. I think that those families want to have more of a say in this process, and so, I wouldn't say that there should be a one-size-fits-all scenario, but at the same time, I do believe that it's when you talk to people, it's not so much us dictating to them as much as it is we're working together to find the best solution for your locality. And that didn't happen and didn't. And quite frankly, it's not happening in a lot of places throughout the state. And we're going to see a lot more Dentons happen unless we take a different perspective and a change of how we do our business at the Railroad Commission.
Okay. And I want to just go to one last round of questions from me, and then we'll get some from the audience if anybody has any. So we've kind of talked about this tension between property rights and mineral rights, and it's in Texas. You often hear this idea that mineral rights, they often take precedence over surface property rights. And I'm wondering, Ryan and then Steve, what can the Railroad Commission do to relieve some of this tension, if anything, or is this kind of left to the legislature?
No, I think there are some things that we can do to help relieve that tension, and it is certainly to help and advocate to operators. What are the things that you need to be doing if you're going to be active in a community? My wife and I live in a small town south of Houston called Friendswood. We got about 30,000 residents. We have 3 kids, Sarah, Luke, and Lance. They're 10 and 8 and 5. And if something was going on that concerned my wife, who's also an engineer, she's been in the energy industry in the past, but concerned her about activities, she would not, this would not be a political dialogue to her. It would be, I want to understand, she would say, what's going on in this area, because I'm worried first and foremost about my kids. And so helping make sure that she's got the access, the information about whatever is happening is going to be really important to her. And so whether it's a producer who's applying for a permit, if it's how they're going into that area. By the way, Friendswood has a big oil field right next to us. It's still being produced out of today. But the activities are going, whether it's provided by the producer, whether it's provided through information that's given to the Railroad Commission, making that information available to her and in a way that she can understand and really digest, so that she feels confident that, okay, I understand what's going on here, I understand why they're doing whatever it is they're doing, and I understand the practices and whatever safety measures are being taken. That, I think, is most important. And we can really advocate operators manners to do that, to engage with those communities very early on in the process.
And Steve, what would you say the biggest thing the Railroad Commission could do?
Well, we have to remember that the landowner rights is why we're here today as an agency. I mean, this agency was founded to protect landowner rights back in the late 1800s. And so that is part of its core foundation. And the question then is, what have we evolved into or transformed into? Is it still an agency where property owners feel like they are empowered and they have some say? And I think that we've had a lot of debates and conversations about eminent domain and the application of eminent domain authority, particularly as it relates to common carriers. And I would say that the agency has fallen short on its duties, its original founding duties, to make sure that it can be a protector of property owners' rights in the state. And so I'd like to see a little bit more, obviously, public engagement with that as well. I think that the notification process needs to be improved and earlier in the process, where we engage the public in what that may mean for a pipeline, for a common carrier to be applied for in that process, but also make sure that these property owners have recourse, and that if there is a decision that's made by the Railroad Commission, that these folks can still go to the courts and utilize the courts to fight for their property. And so it's part of the core value of this agency. I don't know how we've gotten to a point where property owners, too many in the state, feel like the agency's failed them because the agency was created to protect them.
Gotcha.
I'd like to just make one quick comment. Several times during the dialogue today, Steve has been pretty critical of the Railroad Commission. I think it's important to recognize that you have an 800-person staff over there or so who has worked very hard, given very dynamic shifts. I mean, bigger booms, bigger production rate increases, new technology, something we haven't seen in decades in this state. And the staff over there has worked really hard to try and maintain the rules and keep up to speed with what's happened. And so, are there opportunities to improve? Sure. That's why I'm running for office, and I'm really excited to bring some technical expertise and engage staff, not just in Austin, but at the district level, to talk about where are those opportunities to improve. But I think it's really important to give the folks their credit that given the dynamic, really dramatic changes going on, how hard they have worked and the challenges that they have faced, and not just simply kind of do the normal political thing, which is just criticize those agencies, because I know those people are working really hard.
Well, but a lot of that isn't so much on the field type of criticism. That is leadership criticism as well. And so, criticizing the folks who've been elected to uphold these values that undergird the Railroad Commission's mission statement as itself. And so we started this conversation talking about the need for additional funding. And so I recognize that in that capacity, when we're talking about the weight and the burden that's being put on the agency staff, we have to recognize that it's not so much me criticizing the staff, it's as much as the legislature failing the staff to provide them with the resources to be able to keep up with the growth and productivity in the state.
And with that, we're going to see if we have any questions from the crowd. We have a couple over here.
Thank you for taking my question. I'm a farmer and rancher in the Texas Hill Country, and my attention was brought to this race by the blogging and writing of your libertarian opponent, Dr. Mark Miller. My concern is with my own work. I rely on my water well, and I understand that the Railroad Commission doesn't regulate water, but I think that there's a major conflict between private property rights and the public water resource rights. And I wonder what either of you would do as Railroad Commissioner to ensure the availability and the safety of Texas' many expansive aquifers.
Anybody want to jump in first?
Well, I've actually put forth a plan to reduce our dependence on freshwater resources for drilling in this state. And so we would like to get that down to zero by the year 2020. I think we can do it. I think that we have the technology available now to be able to do it. It's just linking that technology to the operators in the field and making it affordable for them, making it accessible for them to be able to utilize more recycled water or any other water-friendly types of techniques, and having the will at the agency to push us towards a definitive goal, I think is important. The key is that, do we have a sustainable process by way, we're using so much water to date that will we have those water resources for generations to come? And of course, with drought and with the growth in population, it's tough to see that, when we use this water, we don't want to go back now and drink it or brush our teeth with it, or at least I would not advise that. And so, we want to make sure that we have a plan in place and we're serious about making sure that we're reducing our dependence on fresh water for drilling.
Right, Ryan, you want to?
Sure. Well, keep in mind that any conversation we have about water, when it's a very good one, we face it all around the state. We've got to put it in the context of how everybody uses water. So right now, for hydraulic fracturing in this state, hydraulic fracturing utilizes less than 1% of the water that's used around the entire state. So to have a conversation only about oil and gas we cannot be doing the state a service sometimes, because we've got to say, all right, let's put together a comprehensive water plan, some of which the legislature has been working on in past legislative sessions. And certainly oil and gas will be a piece of that. And there are areas of the state where oil and gas's water usage is more than the average 1%. And in those areas, I think there are opportunities to work with municipalities and to combine resources of oil and gas companies to have them develop in the private sector recycle infrastructure that on an individual basis is not economical. And so I think as a Railroad Commission, we can help advocate and introduce or connect those areas where we see that there are opportunities to pool resources and develop recycle infrastructure, so that we're not arbitrarily forcing some deadline or forcing something that will force some operators out of business. We're simply saying, if you're going to spend money to inject that water, can you instead divert that to some pooled resources to recycle it instead? And I think there's opportunities for us to be the conduit, if you will, for those ideas.
Any other questions?
Good morning. Thanks for coming. If the title of the agency were to be changed, would you favor something like the Texas Energy Agency, or should it be the Texas Fossil Fuel Agency? This leads me to my main question, which is, how do you see the agency's role in encouraging the transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources?
So the first part of that question, I'll say I don't have a specific name in mind. Frankly, I'm not that particular. Texas Energy Commission, any of those, as long as they describe what we're doing, I don't have a strong opinion on today. One point somebody said Texas Energy Commission, well, the Texas Ethics Commission has the same acronym, so no, that'll never fly. So whatever name we can choose that really identifies what the agency's working on. We talk about advocating for transition away from fossil fuels. I don't think that's the position of this agency. We're not charged with that position. Now, I think there's an opportunity for us, though, and this is within both the oil, gas, wind, solar, whatever, for this agency to really help articulate a long-term energy plan or energy strategy for this state. And that's not mandates or subsidies. I think that what we see almost unilaterally around the nation, when government mandates or subsidies are put in place, they have a real potential to have long-term economic issues, because when those subsidies or mandates are removed, it causes an unnatural market balance and you have real problems economically. But I think what we can do is we can say, look, this is what we see. These are the reserves that are out there, how they can be developed, where we can utilize certain sources of power, and in particular, what infrastructure do we need to be prepared as a state to develop to leverage all of those different avenues to produce energy? And I think simply by putting out there a vision for where those opportunities will come from and what is our role, or what do we think the need is for long-term infrastructure, can give a lot of companies, private individuals, confidence to invest in whatever they want to invest in, whatever research they want to do. And some of that will be into utilizing carbon capture from power plants for enhanced oil recovery, or it might be using wind power or whatever else they want to invest in. But by simply providing the framework, we give them the confidence to invest in whatever research and development they want to do.
What do you think, Steve? Is there a broader role for the Railroad Commission?
Yeah, and first, my preference is Energy Resources Commission, but I'm open to any other name that makes sense, better than Railroad Commission. I do think that this agency can play, I agree with a lot what Ryan just said, but I do think that the agency can play a lead role in being a key stakeholder in driving that conversation, that process. I think a lot of it's going to be making sure we elect a governor, quite frankly, that has the same will and determination to see about a diversification of our energy sources in the state. And right now, short-term and long-term, making sure we have a legislature that has the same mindset as well. I mean, you can't do it in a vacuum. And so we'll need partners at the table to work with in order to achieve our desired goals and making sure that it's a goal that's attainable, but also has the buy-in of folks like you in the community, that you have a way to engage in that process and to influence it as well and speak to it and inform it. And so it will take a number of different stakeholders in the state at the leadership level, engaging with the community to making sure that we have a plan that works for our state moving forward.
Any other questions in the crowd?
Good morning. I'm Paul Rowe. I'm actually with Mark Miller's campaign. And Jim, first I want to say the journalism you do in the Texas Energy exceeds any 3 to 5 journalists in this state. I think this is really great, and we appreciate it.
No need to compliment me. That's not what people here to see. So, yeah.
So it's no surprise that I also agree that having an engineer on the commission would be a great thing. And
Thank you.
So I'm also an engineer, so let me ask you an engineering question. Up in Parker County, there's methane in the groundwater. The Railroad Commission's looked down. It's not fracking. It's not horizontal drilling. We know that methane's not coming from the producing formation, and the commission said, therefore, there's not a violation. And I think even the commission said it's probably coming from the straw in the formation just underneath. What are your hunches? What would you investigate? And what do you think the commission ought to be doing to find out what's going on there?
Well, although I'm not an engineer, I'm the only one who actually has put forth a plan on that exact subject you mentioned. With regards to how we utilize groundwater conservation districts in this state, making sure that they provide for some oversight and some influence on the cementing process for those wells. I think in these cases we have an inadequacy of cementing of the wells, and I know that in talking to a lot of the groundwater conservation districts and their leadership, they see this and they want to make sure that they can protect the freshwater resources that the state has. And so that's their job. They are supposed to be that champion. And so they should be at the table as well to make sure that whatever standards that are applied to a well within proximity to those freshwater resources, that those standards are such that will protect those resources from methane migrating into those water resources. And they're not there right now. They're not at the table right now. We can do a better job in empowering them.
What do you think, Ryan?
Well, I disagree with what Steve said. You know, we just put in place, the commission put in place a new wellbore integrity standard just over the last couple of years, and it required concrete to go all the way to surface around your surface casing. And so there's been some new advances in wellbore integrity requirements that are much more robust. In fact, frankly, if you look at the inability to do that sometimes, you'll have to go down and perforate your well casing to get concrete all around the surface casing, which kind of drives against logic. Why would I punch holes in my surface casing to put concrete all the way around it? So they've done some things to advance it and are really requiring a lot more of those wells. And I think we don't know how all that will play out today because those are new rules and those have just come online. There are a lot of natural processes that produce methane. There's a process called coal bed methane that is a natural process, and you can see it in water wells all around the state. When naturally occurring, when somebody's water well in their property is depleted, the coal bed will produce methane once the water levels are a certain point. And so I don't have the answer to your question. You say, what's my hunch? I don't know what is producing the methane. I haven't seen the detailed reports that the commissioners have seen, but it could be very likely that some of it is coming out of naturally occurring process. I remember that my family on my mom's side, which had some ranches outside the Dallas area, they used to get natural gas smell sometimes coming out of there, and had no proximity to oil and gas wells. It was just coming out of wherever their water well was. So there's a lot of research to be done in those areas to make sure that we're confident in those things. My only assumption can be that the commission is doing that today and that they're finding the results that has to do with some natural process.
But let me just say, but it's hard to disagree with the fact that having the groundwater conservation districts at the table and not keeping them at an arm's length distance from that process is not a good strategy as well. And so that is, and at the essence of what I think is needed for this agency is to make sure that the stakeholders who are there to protect those water resources have some say in that process as well to protect those resources.
All right, and with that, we do have another question.
This is a very active table.
Methane getting into the water supply is one thing. Methane escaping into the atmosphere is another. Methane is a far more powerful greenhouse gas in the short term than carbon dioxide. What can the Railroad Commission do to reduce the escape of methane into the atmosphere from wells and from pipelines?
Well, I think that, we talk about the agency's deficiencies, its labor deficiencies. It's a big part of the problem, making sure that we have inspectors on the ground and monitors on the ground to make sure that we're protecting our air quality and environment as well. Now, of course, some of that's going to be TCEQ, and so making sure that we have a relationship with our partner agencies and we can talk to each other and we're not working in silos, I think is an important part of this as well. But make sure we have the available resources to adequately monitor methane that's escaping into the atmosphere is going to be important. And that's going to need someone going to the legislature and being able to articulate that to the appropriators there.
Yeah, I think that people are aware, and whether it's escapes that are uncontrolled or flaring that is controlled, there is, with all the development going on, these are going to be continued challenges for us. And so making sure not only that we understand make sure that those things are permitted and that they're tracked, but also making sure that the infrastructure is able to be developed to capture those things. I mean, if we have a flare that's going, okay, well, what do we do with that, and how do we capture it? What do we do with the captured components? And are there pipelines or other infrastructure we can utilize to transport them and get them somewhere else? So there is a lot of long-term plan that's coupled with permitting and tracking to make sure that as these new wells are developed, that we have the infrastructure, if you will, and coupled with the requirements, so that we have effective processes to capture those things.
Anybody else? Otherwise, I think that about wraps it up. Thanks everybody for joining us, and thanks to Steve and Ryan for being on stage.
Thanks for having us.
All right.